Hello viewers, welcome to my orchid world. Today in this video we will be discussing about the reasons that our orchids do not bloom or rebloom. Basically we will be discussing about few points which are very crucial for reblooming of your orchids, and also we will be discussing the steps that we can take to ensure that blooms are there in your orchids. Our orchids bloom properly all throughout their blooming seasons. We'll also look into some points which we might not be aware of, and also we will be discussing how we can take very good care of our orchids in general to ensure blooms every year. So let us begin. A very common cause of orchid not producing blooms is that they are still young and has not attained maturity to produce blooms. Like dendrobium orchids need at least 3 to 4 mature canes to be able to produce blooms. A dendrobium of this size is certainly a small seedling, as you can see, which is very young to produce blooms. Hence, we need to be aware of this fact that our orchid may be young and still has few years to become mature. Some orchids require a period of dormancy to initiate blooming. If they do not experience the appropriate dormancy conditions, they may not produce flowers. Many dendrobium species need winter rest, such as the Dendrobium nobile, the Dendrobium ephyllum, Dendrobium farmeri, and etc., to initiate flowering in late winter. I have talked about these dendrobium orchids in my previous videos. Please check out the links and you will come to know more about these orchids which need a bit of winter rest. During this time, watering and fertilizer should be completely stopped, and only then the orchid initiates blooms. If we do not allow our orchids to take proper winter rest, they may refrain from blooming, and eventually we will keep wondering why our orchids are not blooming. So it is always advisable to make a bit of research. Newly bought orchids take some time to get adjusted to your environment. When you buy a new orchid, it might have been growing in some other environment with different temperatures, humidity, and watering. So when it comes to you, it may encounter some other temperature, humidity, and a different watering schedule. So you need to give some time to the orchid to get adjusted to your environment. We should understand that orchids might be growing in a different setup, and so it needs few months or even few years to get adjusted to your settings. They need some time, and also once they get adapted, they will start producing blooms, and till then we need to be patient. This cattleya just arrived few days ago, and you can see it was potted in coconut fiber which has disintegrated. Coconut fiber is very water retaining media which is not very good for cattleya orchids. Cattleya orchids like to be on the drier side, and that's what keeps it healthy. The orchid has a few dead pseudobulbs which I need to remove, but right at the moment I will not do anything with this orchid. I'll give it some time, at least 1 month or so. The roots have overgrown the pot. There are few dead roots, but for now I'll keep it as it is. I will not touch it. I will not even remove the pseudobulbs. There are few new growths. The roots had started growing, but somehow it got dried up, maybe in the transportation. So I'll keep it standing as it is, and then when new roots start growing on the new shoots, and then I'll repot it in a better media with a lesser water retaining media, because cattleya orchids, as I said, wants to be in the drier side. That's what it requires, medium quantity of water. Once I repot it, I'll give you an update on it. Till then it will remain as it is. Orchids typically require the right amount of light and quality of light to bloom. If they do not receive enough light, they may not produce blooms. On one hand, excessive direct sunlight can be harmful, and on the other hand, very less light can also lead to no blooms. Finding the right balance is very crucial for your orchids, and it often depends on the specific type of orchid. So in this case, on screen you can see cattleya orchids, which are very sensitive to light. They need very bright filtered light, same as almost vanda orchids, and if they do not receive enough light, the leaves turn dark green. You can see on the screen that the orchid on the left side has a few dark green leaves. Recently I uppotted it to this earthen pot, and now it is sitting quite nicely, and now it is receiving copious amount of sunlight, and which has led to new growths, which you can see on the screen. This orchid has been producing new growths since the time it has come to me, but there were no blooms. The leaves were not getting sunlight. The color of the leaves will indicate that whether it is receiving enough sunlight or it is receiving less sunlight. This orchid recently produced one shoot which has a very light colored green colored leaf, and I can see one small tiny bulb forming, which shows that it has produced one bloom. This leaf has received enough light, and so it is light green in color, which should be typically the color of your cattleya orchids leaves, and it might not be visible, but this bulb is producing a spike. It is very tiny, it is growing little by little, and I'm sure this is the bud, because this has been growing from inside. It is not leaf, as I can assure you, and once the bud is formed and once the bloom comes, I'll give you an update. On the other hand, this cattleya orchid also shows that this has not received it has received some less light. This orchid has bloomed for me twice. It has nice white colored blooms with a very dark magenta lip. This also has been shifted to a very bright location, and I'm sure this time new shoots will form, which will eventually bloom. Till then, you need to be patient, and once the bloom comes, I'll give you an update. Orchids are sensitive to their watering conditions. Both overwatering and underwatering can be detrimental to blooming. The roots of orchids need to breathe, and waterlogged conditions can lead to root rot. Conversely, if the orchid is very dry, it may not have that energy to produce blooms. Phalaenopsis orchids are very sensitive to overwatering. If their roots are constantly wet, the roots will rot and the orchid may die. Even if the orchid does survive, it will refrain from blooming, as the roots will be suffocated and the orchid health will be affected. You must have seen this orchid which had a root rot condition few months ago. I had made a video on it. The new leaves that you can see have grown after that, after I reported it, and it has grown very well. But this year, this Phalaenopsis orchid is not going to produce any blooms, because the energy that this orchid has is being directed to produce new leaves and new roots so that the orchid survives. For orchids that are sick or stressed, the main aim of the orchid will be to produce new roots and new leaves so that the orchid can survive. Survival is more important than producing new blooms. Hence, energy is being directed to produce new parts. Orchids come from diverse environments, and their temperature and humidity preferences are different. Sudden temperature changes or consistently incorrect temperatures can impact flowering. Additionally, inadequate humidity levels, especially in drier climates or indoor environments, can affect the orchid's ability to bloom. I have a video on growing orchids in less humid conditions. Please check out that video. It is always good to check out the climate where you live in. You should always know about the temperature, humidity, and the light conditions of your area so that you can adjust these conditions according to the need of your orchids. Also, a bit of research on the requirement of each orchid that you have also helps, because then we know that what each of them need. For example, vanda orchids need high light conditions. You can say they need the brightest of light but filtered one. But if we are not aware of this fact and keep vandas in poor light conditions, then they will neither grow properly, neither they will bloom. Humidity is a very crucial factor for almost all orchids. Most of the orchids are high humidity orchids. In case of dendrobium orchids also, they need high humidity levels, at least a minimum of 50% to 70%. Almost all the orchids need high humidity. In case of Phalaenopsis orchids, temperature plays a very crucial role. For Phalaenopsis orchids to bloom, they need a minimum temperature of at least 17 degrees. Most of the hybrid Phalaenopsis orchids are winter bloomers. During winter, when temperature starts cooling off, Phalaenopsis orchids produces spikes, and the production of spike is very crucial, and it depends on temperature. The temperature, there should be a day-night temperature difference for Phalaenopsis orchids to produce spikes. It should be at least 10 to 11 degrees difference between day temperature and night temperatures. Only then they produce spikes. The night temperatures should fall at least to 17 degrees to 16 degrees, and it is very crucial for Phalaenopsis orchids to bloom. Orchids have specific nutritional requirements, and deficiencies in essential requirements nutrients can prevent flowering. Using the wrong type of fertilizer or neglecting to feed the orchid altogether can hinder its ability to produce blooms. Regular balanced fertilization is crucial for the overall health and flowering of orchids. Species orchids do not need any fertilizer, as I have always said, but hybrid orchids need regular growth and bloom booster for proper growth in the summer and to produce blooms in the winter. Hence, ensure that your orchids get proper nutrients so that you can enjoy blooms. Make sure you provide them with the right nutrients both during the growth period and also during their blooming period as well. Orchids need to be repotted from time to time to refresh their growth medium and also ensure optimal root health. However, if repotting is done incorrectly, such as disturbing the roots excessively, damaging them, or using the wrong type of potting mix, not paying any attention to the need of the orchid, it can cause stress to the plant and delay or prevent flowering. Also, if the orchid is not repotted for years, leading to a decomposed medium, the roots will get suffocated, and as a result, the health of the orchid will suffer and eventually there will be no blooms. On screen, you can see the Zygonesia Murasaki Komachi, which I had reported last year, and already the roots have become pot bound. You can see the roots are quite healthy. There are no visible dead roots, but this orchid needs repotting. So I will need to repot it, and hence this orchid was not blooming. Here is another orchid which has not bloomed till now. It is a dendrobium orchid. I suspect that this orchid is still young to produce, but it has quite a number of canes. It keeps on producing new canes, but there has been no blooms yet. I suspect that it needs repotting once again, but it has not become pot bound. But overall, if you look at the orchid, it has not grown to its full maturity, and hence I think this orchid will need 2 more years or 2 or 3 more years to bloom. But then you can see there is a new growth again in the base of the orchid, and if this orchid becomes matured after this cane becomes fully grown, then I can expect blooms from this orchid. Orchids can be sensitive to changes in their environment. Reporting drastic environmental changes or physical damage to the plant can cause stress and affect their ability to bloom. If an orchid is sick, it will direct its energy to regenerate itself rather than producing blooms. Hence, they direct energy to develop new roots, new leaves, and new pseudobulbs. On screen, you can see the Cattleya cernua, which arrived few days ago. As you can see, the orchid is very stressed. There was a small key developing at the base of the orchid, but it is eventually going to die. As you can see, the leaf has come off. There was another key which has also died. The main mother plant is still there, but one of the leaf of the only there are two leaves and one of the leaf is already affected. That leaf is also going to die. What I did is removed it from its previous setup, and I added some more sphagnum moss for added humidity, because this stressed orchid needs high humidity to grow new roots, to grow new keys, and hence usually I do not do this with new orchids, but I changed its setup, put more sphagnum moss and put it in a glass tumbler where I put more sphagnum moss for added humidity at the base of the tumbler. This stress orchid will need several years to cope up and to become normally healthy, and it is quite nice orange colored Cattleya species, and I really wanted this orchid. I got this orchid at a discount price since it is stressed orchid, and I will have to take very good care of this orchid. Right now, no fertilizer, only I need to keep the sphagnum moss inside the tumbler moist so that it keeps on producing continuous humidity to this orchid. I'll keep it in a bright location so that it receives quite bright sunlight, but there should be no direct sunlight, and it will be very harmful and eventually it might kill the orchid. So I will not put it in direct sunlight. But this kind of stressed orchids will always direct its energy to producing new parts of the plant, like roots, new leaves and new shoots, and hence there would be no blooms. Expecting blooms from this kind of orchid is not at all practical, and hence we should understand this fact. Insects or pests can damage orchid buds and flowers. Regular inspecting your orchids for signs of pests and taking appropriate measures can prevent blooming issues. Now, this Cattleya firefox tried putting out spikes 3 times up till now. When the orchid first came, it had a spike which was just produced. It was in my initial days of growing orchids. I didn't have much knowledge at that time and just reported the orchid after 1 month. Now, Cattleya orchids are very sensitive to reporting if it has a spike. To cope with the reporting, it sacrifices the spike. So, in the first year, I lost the blooms. In the second year and the third year, pests infested the spike and totally ate up the buds when they were still small. So, pests are a very serious issue in the way of blooms. We need to keep checking our orchids from time to time for pests and diseases and take timely action when we notice them. You saw how important it is to understand the specific requirements of each orchid, whether it is a species or a hybrid orchid, and adjust our care routine accordingly. We need to have knowledge about the climatic conditions where these orchids grow and also the climatic conditions where we are growing them. Hence, careful practices and careful observation is very crucial for your orchids to bloom every year. Hope you like the video. If you have liked it, please give it a like and hence subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.